Hey class, I am coming to you after our class so that we can continue along with our discussion about how to best organize and write your informative speech thesis. The first step that I'm going to want to remind you all about is to pull out your research questions. Those research questions are going to be built and fold into the next step of creating a concept map. Remember that concept map is going to be due in our conferences next week. But the conference map, as a friendly note, and you may remember us talking about this in class, is that your concept map and what you base that concept map is on your research question. So for the purpose of this last part of the demonstration, we're going to be working with this research question right here, which is how does social media affect adolescent boys' overall well-being? Let us say that that is our research question, and that's where we know that we want to start to focus our informative speech efforts. The important thing about this research question is that you are going to use this as the concept map topic. The concept map is going to ask you for a topic, but you're going to use this in order to start to narrow your focus, draw out the different webs, and start to see what you have come up with. What is the answer to this question? What are the multiple parts or answers to this question? So make sure that you are doing that. But this research question is going to be incredibly important when we come back to understanding our organizational pattern in our thesis statement. So as a reminder, we discussed a bit about your homework assignment, and these are the steps that you are going to go through to generate your thesis for your informative as well as your persuasive speeches. And for your topic approval, you are going to be required to turn in 5 things. The first thing that you will write up here is your topic, but not in general, social media. Instead, you would say something like social media's effects on boys. Something like that. Make it easy. Then, what we are going to do is we are going to establish 3 different things. And this is the new information that each of you are going to come to write. We talked about something called the general purpose. Then we talked about the specific purpose. And then we started to speak about the thesis statement. But I like to refer to this like an upside down triangle with each of the parts being a part of the triangle, meaning that the general purpose is the most broad purpose of this entire speech. What is the bottom line reason that you are getting up here to talk to us? Well, it falls into 3 categories as a reminder: to entertain, to persuade, and in the case of this speech, it's going to be your general purpose, to inform. It's the most broad purpose that we can have, but we know that when we speak, when we choose our supporting materials, when we choose our visual aids, everything goes back to that idea of what is my purpose here? Oh yes, it's to inform. It is not to persuade. And if you remember, that is of great importance when we keep it at the foremost of our mind. What is our purpose of speaking? To inform? Well, if it is, then think about yourself much like a journalist or an investigative reporter. You are looking for the who, what, when, where, why, how. That is what you want to tell us, that basic information. From the general purpose, we now know that our purpose is to inform, and we can build that down to start to narrow and specifically get into, well, what do we specifically want to inform our audience about? And that's what we call the specific purpose. But we can also use that synonymously with an idea called the central idea. And if you remember, the central idea is that unifying element that runs throughout your entire speech. It is what your speech is about. Our purpose, to inform, but to inform us about what is going to be the specific purpose. So in this case, all I've done is I brought down those words, to inform my audience about. And if you remember from our lecture, that about is going to be key. We do not want the word here to be that. If we put the word that, the sentence is going to become persuasive. As that, to inform my audience, that means that the next statement to come and follow it is going to be something factual, something concrete that I want my audience to believe or to agree with or to take on. We want to inform you about something. And so we want to make sure we don't have the word that. And then the other things we want to make sure that we don't have in the specific purpose are going to be keywords like should not, best, worst, good, bad, right, wrong, moral, immoral. These words are persuasive words, and we, by putting them inside this specific purpose with a that, is only going to make this entire thing persuasive. Work to avoid these words. We do not want to encourage anybody to think that our topic is any of these things until we get to the persuasive part. And do not worry about writing anything persuasive today. Do not worry about that persuasive speech until we get through a good amount of our informative speech. Right now, this is our job to think about. So, speaking of thinking about what? Well, now we need to make sure that we are narrowing our focus of our specific purpose. And so this specific purpose, as a reminder, also known as your central idea, we're going to build off of this research question that we have been using. So this research question that you've been concept mapping, that you now have been looking at, that you're now getting answers to, can very easily translate into your specific purpose. It simply needs to be readjusted. So for example, if our question is, how does social media affect adolescent boys' overall well-being? Maybe then we simply cut the first part to make it a question, and instead we rephrase that as to what we want to inform our audience about. So if we say something like, to inform my audience about the ways social media affects adolescent boys' overall well-being. And now I have taken that statement or the research question and I've simply turned it into a central idea. What is this speech going to be about? Well, I bet it's going to be about the ways social media affects boys' overall well-being. Oh my gosh, right? And so what we can do here, and also please note that we can also break this down, but the important thing that I want you all to remember is that there should only be one purpose of this speech. We're going to have multiple main points, but we're going to only have one purpose. So if this statement, after that falls after the about, has two ideas to it, make sure you're only leaving that to one. So to inform my audience about the ways social media affects adolescent boys' overall well-being and how they respond to it, no, just one statement. You can also start to narrow this. Let's say, for example, you have the research question, how does social media affect adolescent boys' overall well-being? And you start to realize, oh my gosh, it affects their mental health, and it affects their physical health, and it affects their relationship engagement, and it affects their schoolwork. I don't know which one. But if you start to realize, oh my gosh, one of these is way more I'm way more interested in it, I'm getting a lot more evidence from one of these research questions, then maybe you already know that you want to narrow your focus to simply just that. And so, for example, if you wanted to, let's say you took the mental health, we could do something like, to inform my audience about how social media affects the mental health of adolescent boys. And then we'll talk about the different ways that it does. So there's a couple different ways to make this research question work for you. You can keep it on the broad scale and simply turn the question into the central idea itself, or you can even narrow the answers to become the central idea itself. Either way, it's up to you on where you want to go. But the next thing that we need to do is create this thesis statement. And our thesis statement, remember, is a combination of the what, the central idea, plus the how, your main points. So we already have our central idea, which is awesome. All you have to do is bring that down. So we will make sure that this says, to inform my audience, one more time for the cheap seats, about the ways social media affects adolescent boys. That's my effects overall. Adolescent boys' overall well-being. And now what are we missing? Well, we're missing our main points. And that's where we left off in class, and that's what we are going to look at now. How are we going to determine our main points? And this is an important part because it's going to be the key to unifying your entire audience and keeping them on track and allowing them to understand what you were talking about in a clear manner. And so we need to get these main points going and understand how they work. So for us, one thing that you're going to need to think about is the idea of balance. If you remember last time, a 2 to 3 minute speech, we suggested needed about 2 to 3 main points. That would be enough time for you to give a good breadth and depth of the information that you are talking about. But now our speech is getting a bit longer. This speech is going to be 5 to 7 minutes in length. And with 5 to 7 minutes in length, now we do have the opportunity to build main points out beyond 3. The minimum number that you can have is 2. One main point just makes no sense. Let's put it that way. And then the maximum amount that you can have is 5. Because if it's a 7-minute speech and maybe we spend 1 minute on our introduction and 45 seconds on our conclusion, that gives us a solid 5 minutes that if in each main point you wanted to give that or give 1 minute to each of those, that would be a great amount of balance. So note that you can have between 2 to 5 main points. How do we decide what pattern of organization we want to use for our main points? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you need to decide what type of category of informative speech is this. Every single informative speech will fall into one of these 6 different categories. And if you are following along in your packet, this would be the time to turn to page 10. So page 10, it's going to look like this, building your informative speech thesis, main point, organization. The different categories that we have here are going to be things like people. So an informative speech could be about the impact of a person or an individual or a group. So talking all about them. Places, this would be a place like a location and their content. So what I mean by that, like we would talk about Loyola Marymount University and the aspects of that college, if you will. We can talk about objects. This would be anything that's not a non-human subject. So anything, a particular object. This would include animals. If you had an inanimate object, a computer, a shoe, a backpack, something like that, a skateboard, a bike that you wanted to talk about, that would be an object. Then we have events. This would be noteworthy occurrences. They could be past. We could talk about a war of the past. We could talk about the present. What's an event that's going on right now? Maybe a future event, something that we are looking forward to or that comes up every year that goes on. So we can talk about particular events. But the thing that I believe that each of you all will be working most with is going to be the last 3. Some of you may want to organize via event, but I believe that you will be utilizing concepts and phenomena most. With that said, concepts, as we hopefully know, these are abstract or complex theories, ideas, beliefs, ways the world functions, etc. The other type of category that yours may fall into is something called phenomena. And that is either natural or supernatural. So, woo-hoo, alien, or I don't know, something else exciting, right? Or universal occurrences of like unexplainable or inconclusive ideas. So if we're talking about a contingent idea, it would fall into this idea of phenomena as well. Now here's the thing. Once we figure out what category our informative speech falls into, that will easily inform how we can start to organize those main points. And so, if you look also now back at page, and where is it? Page 9, you are going to see these. I'm just going to sit down with you here. You're going to see different categories, the organizational patterns for informative speaking. So there are 4 different organizational patterns that we're going to talk about today. They are chronological, spatial, topical, and cause and effect. And in fact, in the interest of time, I'm going to drop spatial because none of you are going to organize something spatially in this. But if you wanted to write the answer, spatial organization deals with it's an organizational pattern that organizes via direction. So top to bottom, left to right, north to south, that's how you would organize that. And then spatial categories would be things like an object. So we could do an object, and then it would also be a place. These would be 2 things that you would organize spatially. And because none of us have objects or places, I'm going to guess that we will not have spatial organization. So the other 3 I am going to talk about. So really quick, just to go over these definitions with you. The first one, chronological. Chronological organization it deals with a pattern of time. So the categories that fall for chronological are people, events, concepts, and you can also add phenomena in there as well. So if we were to talk about chronological order, and if you were thinking about a person, if we were to watch like a TV show or something, we would want to know about this person, right? If we were talking all about them, it would maybe be like to inform us about like the career of so-and-so. Let's say if we wanted to talk about the career even of Amanda Whitten, which we wouldn't do, but if we want to talk about the career of Amanda Whitten, now we know that we're talking specifically about the career. So could we put that in chronological order? Yes. So we could talk about it in terms of dates. We could say like, or we could do it like the beginning, the middle, the end of her career, or we could talk about, so the beginning of her career, so starting in like 2001, the early years, 2001 to 2005, the post-New York years, 2007 to, 2009, and then the adult learning years, 2010 to 2018, or 19. Gosh, right? So that's how we could organize it. We can categorize it in that way. But our minds work in chronological order. If we think about how we've been raised and how we've come to understand the world, everything that we've ever picked up, if you read a history book, for example, if we're talking about an event and we're talking about something, it doesn't start with the middle and then go back to the beginning and then go to the end. No, we've been trained to figure out like, oh, this is what happened before the war, and then this is what happened during the war, and then these were the effects after the war, and then this is how we should learn about that for the future, right? So it follows this process, because if it started at the end and then it went back to the beginning and then it went to the middle, your audience would be so confused as to like, why did that happen? It doesn't make any sense. So we organize it in this chronological pattern. The last thing is this idea of a concept, right? So if we have a concept and we're trying to explain our concept or our phenomena, oftentimes it's easy to talk about like within theories utilizing this idea of chronology. Something like, this is what influenced the theory to begin. This was the discovery and application of the theory, and then maybe this is how the theory is being looked at and explained now. So chronological order is an effective way to organize. There's only a couple of you in this class that I believe would be best served with chronological order. And that's if you're talking about the history of something. If we need steps about what happened or the process of or how something was leading up to the next, that's the chronological order that you're going to want to use. So like the beginning, the middle, the end, the first, the second, third, like whatever, however that's going to go in order of time. So we're going to drop the spatial, and then we're going to move into topical and cause and effect. And I think that the best thing for each of us to do is to look at the next page, which is page 12. And so if you see on page 12 here, specifically at the top, you're going to get this chronological organization little information. I can't stress enough how each of you should just read chronological, topical, cause and effect organization. It will really be important to do so, and it will help you to figure out a little bit more of where you want to go, or exactly where you should go. Let's put it that way. So if you have the good news is, so you can read through this chronological one, but then on page 13, you're going to see topical organization and cause and effect. And what you'll start to notice here at the top is that if you have a speech about a person, a place, an object, an event, or concept, or phenomenon, you can organize all of those topically. You've been doing that already this semester in regards to topical organization. This is organized by topic, and I know that sounds silly, like, okay, yes, it's in the word, but think about it if you were to say, like, when you talked about to get to know you better, right? You didn't say, like, I'll talk to you about my birth, and I'll talk to you about where I was raised, and then I'll talk to you about where I went to school, and then I'll talk to you about what I want to know. We didn't do it in chronological order. Instead, you decided to do it topically. I'll tell you about my family, my job, and my hobbies. Those main points don't have a connection necessarily with each other, but they do have a connection with who you are. And so you decided to take multiple topics or components of you and make that into your main point organization. So topical order, like it says on the top of page 13, it's organized by specific topics. And so if your speech doesn't have some kind of clear history or need to divide it by space inside, then topical organization can be a great pattern for you. So for example, there's a thesis or a central idea here to inform my audience about the history of feminism. Now we just started saying, wait, Amanda, you were just talking about the history of feminism being chronological. Absolutely. But let's say I don't want to. I want to talk about multiple things and I don't want to do it in a historical pattern. Well, then what we could do is organize it by topics instead. Because sometimes we have so many other things that we wanted to talk about, but think about these main points as big houses. They're houses for your information. So all they are is a title of which you're going to put all that stuff in. So instead of doing chronological, to inform my audience about the history of feminism, I will describe the first four mothers of the movement, the major ideas that shape each wave, and critical laws that have come from feminist movement work. And if you go back to that chronological order on the first one, you'll see that I used feminism as well, but we talked about first wave, second wave, third wave. Same idea. First wave, you can talk about like who started it and what happened. Then second wave, you can talk about who was involved in that, and what organizations and what happened. And then third, oh yes, and now this is the time period it took place and who was part of it and what happened. They're just simple houses to do so. But if you don't have that, then feel free to use the topical information, right? And the same thing happened here, like with this Disneyland park. But for each of us, if we're thinking about it, and we're thinking about this topical organization, for example, we came up with all of those different topics or answers from our research question before. Things like, how does social media affect adolescent boys' overall well-being? Well, again, maybe it was we found out it was their mental issues, or it was their health, or it was their relationships, or it was their school. So let's say, for example, I'm like, each of these has something very important to offer, and I would like to let my audience know about how social media is for sure influencing them. So what I could do is I could talk about those four things as my main points. So I could say something like, to inform my audience about the way social media affects adolescent boys' overall well-being, I will discuss the effects of, and then we could say something, discuss how it, audience about the ways, affects overall well-being. I will discuss the effect on one's mental health, physical health, school, work, and relationships. And now I have a thesis statement that tells us not only what we are going to talk about, but also how we are going to talk about. And in this case, you're going to have 4 different main points. You can also take this same research question and organize it in a different way. But if you think about many of your, just to go back to it, if you think about many of your research questions, you can organize them in this pattern, especially like what are those answers, put it into a topical order. The one other thing that we want to look at here, however, is the cause and effect. And this works really well for enrichment speeches. It oftentimes works for, of course, advocacy speeches in terms of persuasion. But if you were trying to inform us about some kind of factual knowledge or information, this would be good, factual or information about an issue or a problem. So like by simply reading our research question, it almost informs the fact that we could do this as a cause and effect. So we know that it's social media, right, is our cause, and then what is the effect? It's mental health. The only way that this cause and effect is going to work, however, is if the components of social media are different. But let me explain a little bit of that.